Welcome to Local Heroes. This week, all my heroes come from the east of Scotland. It must be really frustrating to make a great scientific discovery and then have everyone ignore it throughout your lifetime. And yet, that's exactly what happened to my first hero, right here on the Union Canal just outside Edinburgh. He found an extraordinary new sort of wave that no one else believed should exist.
A wave that would revolutionise 20th century communications.
His name was John Scott Russell.
John Scott Russell had grown up in Glasgow, where he was so fascinated by the creak and roar of the early steam engines that he abandoned his career in the church to become an engineer.
His first engineering success came on the roads. He set up the Scottish Steam Carriage Company, and in beautiful vehicles he carried 26 passengers between Glasgow and Paisley. But within months the whole thing came to a dead end because his carriage was sabotaged and 4 passengers died. So Russell changed horses and accepted an invitation from the Union Canal Company to try and fight off the threat from the steam carriages and the newfangled railways by designing and building better canal boats. And this was the turning point of his career. This is now called the Scott Russell Aqueduct because it was right here on the canal that he came to test his boats. Now, he reckoned that what slowed them down was the bow wave. But he was really astonished one day in 1834 when he was here on his horse and a boat came zooming along and then it stopped dead.
Though the boat stopped, some of the water kept going and turned into a very peculiar wave.
And he actually chased it on his horse for 2 miles along the canal.
Scott Russell knew this was no ordinary wave. It was much wider than normal, and if it had followed the rules governing normal waves, it would have dispersed or broken, but this one just kept on going. He was convinced he'd discovered something special.
He lived right here at number 8 Stafford Street in the Newtown district of Edinburgh. And it was here that he built himself a 30-foot long tank so that he could study his weird wave under controlled conditions. Using his tank, Russell discovered 3 extraordinary things about solitary waves. First of all, you only get a solitary wave if the height of the wave is comparable with the depth of the water. Now, here in my tank, I've got a water depth of about 2 inches. So if I can make a wave maybe 1 inch high, it should be a solitary wave. Let's have a go. There we are. That's about 1 inch of solitary wave going all the way up and down the tank.
This is just like the solitary wave the boat made on the canal.
Now, the second thing he discovered was when 2 waves came together, it was rather strange. 2 normal waves combine in various curious ways. When 2 solitary waves come together, just watch this. One there, and another one here, so they meet in the middle. And they just seem to ignore one another. One goes absolutely straight through the other. The third thing he discovered was that the speed of the wave depends only on its height. So big waves travel faster than little ones. What I'll try and do now is to make a little one and then a big one. So a little one and then a big one. And you can see the big one actually overtakes the little one and then gets away from it. So you can see that Russell was really excited about this amazing discovery he'd made. He went on to discover that if he could get the canal barges to move at exactly the same speed as the solitary wave, they would actually ride on the solitary wave and then they could be towed along with almost no effort at all. And so he actually instigated a sleeper service every night between Edinburgh and Glasgow, towing people along while they were all snoozing away, with the horses just tiptoeing along the towpath so as not to wake them up. Now, if you'd like to try some of your own experiments with solitary waves, you could do it in the bath like I used to, but actually my mum got very cross because it spills a lot of water out of the end. What I suggest is you get a bit of guttering like this, and you set it up nice and level, and it needs an end on each end, and then you can make yourself either just one wave or two or three, big ones and small ones, and see what you can find out. And write to me about it. Details at the end of the programme.
Although his wave theory wasn't universally acclaimed, he went to London in 1844 to apply it to ship design. He built the ill-fated Great Eastern, falling out badly with Brunel, and his solitary wave was forgotten.
It wasn't until the 1960s that scientists realised how important that solitary wave was, because exactly the same mathematics applied to the travelling of the pulses of light in fibre optics like these.
They're now called solitons. Lots of pulses can be sent at the same time without interference, and they go a long way, just like solitary waves.
And so now, all the world's most advanced telecommunications depend entirely on the work of John Scott Russell. And I'd like to salute him with a solitary wave.
The history of science is littered with stories of pioneers who, while trying to solve one of life's mysteries, only uncover another one. This is Montrose, the birthplace of a brilliant botanist who, while searching through his microscope for the fundamental essence of life, found something that baffled scientists for 50 years. His name was Robert Brown.
Brown was an amateur botanist whose career took off when he met botanist extraordinaire and president of the Royal Society, Joseph Banks, who recommended him as naturalist for the Flinders expedition to Australia.
Brown set sail in 1801, and in 4 years aboard the Investigator, he sailed all the way around Australia and collected more than 4,000 different specimens of plants. He must have had fantastic sea legs because he was never seasick. And the fact that the boat started leaking after only 5 days didn't seem to worry him at all.
When he came back, he spent 5 years classifying his plants and made some important discoveries on the way. Now, as part of his attempt to differentiate between the species, he examined the pollen, and I'm going to take a bit of pollen off the anther of this lily, like that. And then I'm going to put a bit of water on it, because that's what he did. He immersed all his pollen in water, and a cover slip. And he examined them with a powerful microscope.
This is what grains of pollen look like, magnified 300 times.
Another Scot, David Douglas, famous for the Douglas fir, had brought back from North America a plant called Clarkia pulchella. And while Brown was looking at the pollen from that, he noticed something really quite extraordinary. Inside the pollen grains, he said he saw tiny particles a 10,000th of an inch across. And what's more, these particles seemed to be moving. Now, at the time, there was a lot of argument going on about the vital essence of life, the spark that separates, on the one hand, living things from inanimate matter on the other. And in 1827, while he was looking at his pollen grains, he thought he'd discovered the vital essence of life.
So, just to be sure, Brown looked for this movement in living and non-living things. He looked closely at pollen from other plants, at ink, and even milk, like this.
Finally, he tried a really disgusting sample. As he put it, mucus from my nose, which for at least 4 months had catarrh. Ugh.
This is Montrose Library, built on the site of Brown's birthplace.
Brown soon realised that he wasn't actually looking at the essence of life, because he got movement from particles of coal dust and even particles from the Sphinx. But what on earth was happening? I've got a machine to simulate what Brown saw through his microscope. Here are my particles. Just watch what happens when I put them in a dish and then add some hot water.
Brown soon realised that whatever he looked at, living or non-living, particles would move about if they were small enough. What's more, they moved around more vigorously in hot water. It wasn't until decades after his death that scientists worked out what might be going on, what might be causing what's now called the Brownian motion. James Clerk Maxwell and others have been worrying about heat and temperature. They reckon that the molecules in a liquid must be always moving about, and that the hotter the liquid was, the faster they moved. In 1878, Delcer suggested that the invisible molecules moving about might be kicking the little particles that Brown could see through his microscope. If I shed a little light on my machine, you'll see my particles are being jostled by lots of marbles. The marbles are whizzing about, just like those theoretical molecules that Delcer had suggested. By 1905, nobody had proved that molecules existed. They were far too small to see. And then Albert Einstein measured how the particles in pollen moved, did the maths, and got the proof. He showed not only that molecules exist and exactly how they move about, but also that they are the cause of Brownian motion. Robert Brown was a brilliant botanist. He spotted that inside every plant cell is a little structure that he christened the nucleus. And yet we remember him not for his botany, but for this strange jiggling movement that's still called Brownian motion.
This is the Royal and Ancient Golf Club at St Andrews, the home of golf. I've come here to celebrate a brilliant mathematician who for 9 years investigated why golf balls seem to defy gravity. All the members here called him the Professor, but his name was Peter Guthrie Tait.
From 1860, P.G. Tait was Professor of Natural Philosophy at Edinburgh University. He wrote on average one scientific paper every 44 days for 40 years on topics ranging from electrolytic polarization to the mathematics of knots. But it was his addiction to golf that provided his most elegant and understandable work.
Tait was always a very amusing chap. He used to correspond in rhyme with the great James Clerk Maxwell, and he described the game of golf as like a play in several acts, although he spent most of his mathematical time on Act 2, Scene 3, the flight of the ball. When Tait started playing golf, the balls were smooth and round like this. This is a hand-rolled gutta-percha ball. It's red because it's a winter ball, so you could see it in the snow. But the players discovered they actually went further when they got old, when they had nicks and scratches in them. And so they started deliberately putting those in like this. And this is a ball of about the time when Tait was playing in the 1890s. And actually what all these nicks do is reduce the drag. And that's why today we have dimples in the golf balls.
Around 1600, Galileo had described the way balls travelled through the air. He found they followed a regular curve, with the ball reaching its highest point halfway along its journey. It's called a parabola.
I have here a piece of apparatus, a ball, a ramp, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hoops and a hole at the end. And I'm going to try with incredible skill to get this ball into that hole. Look at that! Fantastic! And now let me just try another one to show you how incredibly difficult it is. Very, very reliable. And the reason is that the only force acting on this ball is gravity. Once it leaves the ramp, it's travelling in a beautiful parabola, so it will always go through these 5 hoops and fall into the hole. The trouble was that, as Tait discovered, the flight of a golf ball is very much more complicated. Tait wanted to check whether a parabola was a possible path for a driven golf ball. Imagine that this along here is the ground, and here's a golf ball about to be hit. He knew it went off the club face with a speed of about 200 feet a second, and that a good drive goes about 200 yards. Now, only 2 possible parabolas fit those figures. The first is this low one here, and the ball's in the air for only about 3 seconds. The other one is this high one here, and the ball's in the air for 12 seconds.
You can draw many parabolas, but only these two seemed to fit the speed and range of real golf balls. Tate played a lot of golf and knew that the ball roughly followed the lower curve, but stayed in the air for twice as long, about 6 or 7 seconds. Somehow the ball seemed to be defying gravity.
P.G. Tate was a tremendous golf enthusiast. He wrote a poem about the game. He liked to play 3 rounds a day if he could, and he tried playing at night with a phosphorescent ball, but it set fire to his opponent's glove. When he wasn't playing, he'd come here to the big room, and it was probably right here that he worked out how golf balls seem to defy gravity. Here is a golf ball about to be struck by a club, and here's the club coming in to hit it. Now, all golf clubs have loft, that is, they're tilted upwards like that to make sure the ball goes in the air. And what happens when the club hits the ball is that it gives it spin, so it goes off like this with backspin. When Tate first wrote about this, he got a lot of letters from disgusted golfers of Tunbridge Wells saying, "How dare you accuse us of cheating and giving the ball spin?" But you can't help it. You hit a ball properly, you're bound to give it backspin, and that is what gives the ball lift. Let me show you what I mean. I've got another ball here mounted on an electric motor on a sensitive balance arm that easily goes up and down like that. And I'll just put that horizontal like that. And here I've got a blast of air coming out of a nozzle to simulate the ball rushing through the air. If I switch on the air at the moment, the ball does nothing. It doesn't go up or down. But watch what happens when I first spin the ball. And I'll switch on the air. It gets tremendous lift. It's kicked up into the air because of the backspin it's got. I'll show you that again.
When the ball spins backwards, the air flows more quickly over the top surface than underneath. This creates a lifting force which keeps the ball up in the air, rather like the wing of an aircraft.
Tate actually measured this backspin, and he found that in a properly hit shot, the ball spins at a rate of about 50 times every second. What's more, he showed that the amount of lift it gets depends not only on the speed at which it goes through the air, but also on the rate of spin.
This is why the ball keeps climbing after it's hit when its spin and speed are the highest, but plummets to the ground when it slows down.
And that was how Tate showed why the golf ball appears to climb into the air, because it's lifted by a lifting force that's almost twice its own weight.
In this very building was born one of Scotland's forgotten inventors. I've come to Stonehaven near Aberdeen to celebrate the man who invented the pneumatic tyre, Robert William Thomson.
Stonehaven's most famous son was the 11th child of a mill owner. He hated school and was sent to the United States as an apprentice merchant. But he hated that too. When he came back, his father gave him a workshop and he found his true vocation as an engineer.
At the age of 23, he took out his first patent for an elastic bearing for the purpose of lessening the power required to draw carriages, rendering their motion easier and lessening the noise they make when in motion. In other words, a pneumatic tyre. The credit for the pneumatic tyre normally goes to John Boyd Dunlop, the Belfast vet, who in 1888 made some for his son's tricycle and set up what became the Dunlop Rubber Company. But in fact, Thomson's pneumatic tyre was patented and used 43 years earlier.
Thomson patented his tyre in 1845. He took one or more hollow belts of canvas and impregnated them with India rubber. He encased them in leather and bolted this to the rim of the wheel. When inflated, his tyres were 5 inches thick.
When Thomson introduced his tyre, most roads were absolutely terrible, like this beach really, if you were lucky, or else just mud.
And the wheels they had were actually wooden with an iron tyre shrunk onto the outside to make it good and hard. Now the trouble was it was extremely uncomfortable and very noisy as it went crash, bang, bump over every single pebble. When he introduced his pneumatic tyre like this one, it was very nice and squishy and it was silent, and everyone was impressed by that, but they said it's ridiculous to use that on carriages because it'll be much harder to pull them, because that rubber tyre will have to go squish, squish over every bump, and that'll be hopeless. So he set up a scientific test in Regent's Park. I've set up my own test just like his. I've got two identical carriages here, same size, same shape, there's the same weight on each, and the only difference is that this one's got solid tyres and this one's got inflated pneumatic tyres. And I'm going to pull them along over this natural rough course with these strings that go under pulleys here and over pulleys here and down to these buckets. And I put one more rock in each. They've got the same weight in each. Take the handles off and let them go. 1, 2, 3, go! And look, the pneumatic trolley is miles ahead. Come on, come on, it's not that bad. Very unwilling to travel over this rough ground. And it's quite obvious the pneumatic tyres are much more efficient. When they go over a rock, the thing is that the tyre just squishes a bit, the trolley does not have to lift into the air. Whereas here, a solid tyre has to go right up into the air to get over that rock. The whole trolley has to lift. A terrible waste of effort. When he did his test in Regent's Park, there were two different sorts of road. There was some smooth, macadamized road and some very rough road. And what he found was that the hard tyres needed twice as much pull even on the smooth road and more than 3 times as much pull on the rough road. Unfortunately, he couldn't get enough thin rubber sheets to make his tyres, and indeed there wasn't really very much demand because the motor car hadn't been invented and even the bicycle wasn't really popular in his day. So his pneumatic tyres were well before their time. But he went on taking out patents, and the last one in 1873 we should all be grateful for. He patented the sprung mattress. This is Douglas Wood, about 8 miles south of Brechin, where my next hero was born. He came here and developed one of the most important inventions of the 20th century. He started out looking for thunderstorms and wound up perfecting radar. His name was Robert Watson Watt.
Watson Watt was a distant descendant of James Watt, the dour Scots improver of the steam engine. In 20 years with the Meteorological Office, he became an expert at locating thunderstorms by tracking the radio waves given off by lightning flashes.
During the 1930s, the British government became increasingly worried about German political activity, and they were very nervous about attack from the air.
The best air warning systems at the time were huge concrete reflectors. These were curved walls up to 200 feet long, like giant ears listening to the sky. But unfortunately, bombers could be heard from only 15 miles away. In 1935, the Air Ministry asked him to think about using radio waves to make a death ray to destroy incoming bombers. But this proved quite impractical.
And then he had the idea of using radio not for destruction, but for detection. Now, imagine that there's an enemy aircraft coming in over the North Sea. Here it is, like this, and he wants to detect it using radio. He decided to send out a mass of radio waves, and perhaps they would bounce off the plane and produce little faint echoes which he could listen for. It's no good sending out a continuous beam of radio waves, because then that would be so loud it would drown out any faint echoes. So he sent out pulses of radio so that he could listen in the gaps between the pulses. Now I've got here my own radar system, and I'm going to use sound instead of radio because then I can hear it. And this is my transmitter, this speaker,
And here's my detector, the microphone. And if I switch it on, you can hear the clicks. So that there are gaps between the clicks, and it's in the gaps that I'm going to listen for the returning echo. And I'll turn it round so that it points out over the North Sea and not inland. So I'm going to try and detect that plane. Now, if I detect it, I'll pick up a signal on this cathode ray tube, this oscilloscope here. They were just coming into general use about 1935, which was when he was working. This signal here is the outgoing signal, which it's picking up. What I'm looking for is a signal from the aircraft over the North Sea, somewhere out there. So, let me use my aircraft homing device, this piece of string. So in it flies, coming in over the Dogger Bank, or wherever it is. And we're looking for an echo on the right. There, you can see the aircraft coming in over the North Sea, and as the aircraft gets closer, the signal moves across the screen. And so clearly you could calibrate this screen and measure the distance of the aircraft according to how far across the screen the signal was.
This is how the original system worked, but using radio waves instead of sound. The chain-home system had transmitting and receiving aerials up to 360 feet high. They could detect planes 200 miles away, and by using clever circuits, they could also work out their direction and their altitude.
And the system came to be called radar, which meant radio detection and ranging, measuring the distance. And I'm doing this in this rather curious concrete building because this was the control room of the Douglas Wood chain-home radar station.
Things became much simpler when they were able to combine the transmission and reception in one aerial. This is the primary radar at RAF Lucas near St Andrews. You might think that spinning the aerial is a new idea, but actually they were able to do that in 1940, provided they were prepared to go out and crank it by hand.
My radar looked in only one direction, but now as the aerial sweeps around the sky, the display line sweeps around the screen.
As you can see, there's still a line sweeping around the screen, and it's showing mainly the land masses. So here is the coastline to the south, and there is St Andrews about there, and there's somebody just teeing off from the 18th tee. Watson Watt was well rewarded for his war work. After a lot of argument, the Royal Commission on Awards for Inventors gave him £52,000, but actually he didn't care about the money. What made him really upset was that after the war was over, he was never again going to feel so important. I'm sorry, that's all the heroes from this part of the world. See you next time.
If you'd like to investigate solitary waves, details are on the website at www.bbc.co.uk/education, along with the email address. Or you can write to me at Local Heroes, BBC, 201 Wood Lane, London W12 7TS.